The Tapes of Larchwood Manor. Sarah Williams sat at her cluttered desk at the Metro Times, a regional newspaper, rifling through piles of press releases and court reports. As she sipped her lukewarm coffee, her eyes caught sight of an unmarked envelope among the clutter. Curious, she opened it to find an anonymous note and a grainy black and white photograph of an old mansion encased in woods, Larchwood Manor. The note was concise. 5 missing in the last 2 years. All trails lead to Larchwood Manor. Don't let more vanish. Sarah and her colleague, Jack Simmons, drove their station wagon through the desolate roads that led to the small Midwestern town. The trees seemed to form an ominous tunnel around them. The town itself was like a time capsule from the 1950s, complete with a vintage diner and an old cinema. But what struck Sarah was the palpable tension. Conversations hushed when she mentioned Larchwood Manor at the local grocery store. One woman even made the sign of the cross when she thought Sarah wasn't looking. Sarah spotted Officer Mark Thompson outside the local police station. They'd been childhood friends, and though years had passed, he greeted her with a warm smile. "Sarah Williams, as I live and breathe, what brings you back?" Thompson asked, embracing her briefly. "A story. A big one, I think," she replied, cutting to the chase. "What can you tell me about Larchwood Manor?" His eyes narrowed and his demeanor changed. "Larchwood. People here think it's haunted or something. It's old, it's creepy, but haunted? I doubt it. But the missing persons?" she pressed. "People go missing all the time, Sarah, especially in small towns where everyone thinks they know everyone," Thompson said, uncomfortable. "But I have to admit, the last 5 people who went missing were last seen near Larchwood. At a local thrift shop, Jack found an 8mm film reel labeled The O'Connell Family, 1953. They borrowed a projector and played the footage in their motel room. The film showed a happy family celebrating Christmas, children opening presents, and adults clinking wine glasses. However, when the camera panned toward a closed door within the house, the frame froze and the image distorted, only to return to normal as it moved away. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Grace Miller, a recluse in her 60s who lived closest to Larchwood Manor, reluctantly agreed to speak to them. Her house smelled of stale air and mothballs, and her eyes had the kind of weariness that only years of isolation could bring. "Night times when you hear it, screams like someone's in agony," Grace said, wringing her hands nervously. "I called the police more times than I can remember, but they never find anything. Just tell me it's animals." Back at their motel, Sarah and Jack reviewed their notes, the strange film and the even stranger encounters. Jack was apprehensive but intrigued. "Do you really think we should go there? Spend the night, I mean," Jack questioned. "We're missing pieces of the puzzle, and I think those pieces are in that house," Sarah answered, her eyes narrowing in determination. "We need to find out what's happening at Larchwood Manor, not just for the story, but for the people of this town." The decision was made. They'd venture into Larchwood Manor unaware of how deeply they'd have to dig to unearth its grim secrets, or how those secrets would, in turn, dig into them. The sun was setting as Sarah and Jack arrived at Larchwood Manor, its dark silhouette outlined by the fading orange glow. The air was thick with an almost palpable sense of dread that seemed to emanate from the estate itself. They parked their station wagon near the front gate and gathered their equipment: cameras, audio recorders, flashlights, and a few snacks. "Ready for this?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with both anticipation and fear. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jack responded, snapping a few test shots with his camera. They pushed open the creaky front door, its hinges groaning in protest. The interior was a mix of grandeur and decay. Elegant chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals dulled by years of neglect. Dust and cobwebs clung to the furniture like unwanted memories. Their footsteps echoed through the empty halls as they explored the ground floor, then ascended the grand staircase to the second floor. Everything seemed strangely preserved, as though time had paused. Finally, they found it, the locked door that distorted in the old film. Sarah tried the handle. It was firmly locked. "Looks like we're not the only ones who wanted to keep this room a mystery," Jack quipped. As they set up their cameras and audio recorders, strange things began to happen. The batteries on their equipment drained rapidly, even though they were brand new. Sarah's flashlight flickered erratically, and the temperature seemed to drop significantly, sending shivers down their spines. "We should have brought more battery," Jack murmured, adjusting his camera settings in an attempt to conserve power. Sarah discovered an old reel-to-reel tape recorder tucked away in a dusty study. Curiosity piqued. She played one of the tapes. The audio was grainy but audible. It contained hushed clinical conversations about procedures, test subjects, and the next phase. The words were detached, as though discussing a lab experiment rather than human lives. The last recording was nothing but a long, agonizing scream that left Sarah and Jack frozen in horror. "What the hell was that?" Jack gasped, his face pale. "I don't know, but it's clear something terrible happened here," Sarah said, trembling. Suddenly they heard a loud knock on the front door. It reverberated through the house like the clap of thunder. They looked at each other, heart rates spiking, and cautiously made their way downstairs. Sarah held her breath as she slowly opened the door. There was no one there, but a pile of fresh soil lay on the doorstep, as if freshly dug from the ground. "That's not creepy at all," Jack said, sarcasm lacing his voice, but his eyes betrayed his unease. As they debated their next steps, Sarah's phone rang. She jumped at the sudden noise, her nerves already frayed. It was Officer Thompson. "Sarah, where are you? Are you okay?" "We're at Larchwood Manor. Why? What's happened?" "It's Grace Miller. She's dead. We found her in her home tonight. It looks like she's been... Well, it doesn't make sense. Just get out of there, Sarah. Get out now." Sarah felt her stomach churn, terror settling in like a heavy fog. What had they stumbled upon? And more importantly, would they be able to escape it? The call ended, but the haunting reality it delivered lingered, filling the air with a tangible dread as they realized they were far from alone in Larchwood Manor. Sarah stared at the locked door, her mind racing. Pulling a bobby pin from her hair, she bent it into shape and inserted it into the lock. After a few tense minutes that felt like hours, there was a soft click. The door creaked open to reveal a dark room. With a deep breath, Sarah pushed it open fully. "It's a nursery," Jack said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Indeed, it was. Faded wallpaper featuring playful animals covered the walls, and an antique crib sat in the corner, its bars bent slightly out of shape. Sarah noticed a loose floorboard near the crib. Using a pen, she pried it open and found a hidden compartment. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings about missing persons, surgical tools still stained with something dark, and a cache of psychiatric medications. Some of the labels read sedatives, while others were too faded to read. This is a chamber of horrors," Jack muttered, his face turning ashen. As they absorbed the grim implications, footsteps echoed upstairs. Both froze, eyes meeting in alarm. Gathering their remaining gear, they dashed toward the stairs, but stopped dead at the sight of their vandalized car through the window. Tires slashed, headlights smashed. "We need to hide," Sarah whispered, pulling Jack into a nearby closet just as the front door burst open and heavy footsteps invaded the house. They held their breath as the footsteps grew nearer, then moved away. Seizing the moment, they dashed out, their feet pounding on the creaking floorboards. As they hid in a small alcove, Sarah connected the dots. They weren't missing persons. They were subjects. Test subjects for some sick, unethical experiments. Maybe even the O'Connells themselves were involved, or victims. God knows what they were trying to accomplish. Jack nodded, his eyes widening in understanding and horror. Mind control, psychological experiments. It's all making twisted sense. Just then, headlights pierced through the windows. A car screeched to a halt outside, and Officer Thompson burst in, gun drawn. A hooded figure appeared at the top of the stairs, carrying a large rusty cleaver. "Drop it," Thompson yelled. When the figure lunged at them, Thompson fired. The figure crumpled onto the floor, then was slowly unmasked. It was a man, old but strong, his eyes vacant yet crazed. Fingerprints would later identify him as a surviving member of the O'Connell family. The town was shocked by the revelations. Larchwood Manor was sealed off as a crime scene, then later demolished. Sarah's exposé won her journalistic acclaim, but both she and Jack declined interviews about their ordeal, scarred by their harrowing experience. Officer Thompson was lauded as a hero, though he quietly battled his own nightmares. An in-depth investigation was launched into missing persons cases across the state, uncovering similar instances of unethical experiments. Sarah sat at her desk some weeks later, her eyes falling on another unmarked envelope. It hinted at another location, another set of horrors. She looked at Jack, who was sipping coffee at his desk. "Ready for another story?" she asked, her voice tinged with both dread and determination. The horrors of Larchwood Manor were over, but the scars remained, a haunting legacy that would forever bind them in their search for the chilling truths that lurk in the shadows. Years later, Sarah sat in her well-appointed office at a national news organization, a far cry from her cluttered desk at the Metro Times. Photos of her investigative journeys adorned the walls, but conspicuously absent were any related to Larchwood Manor. That chapter was closed, tucked away in a drawer of past nightmares. Jack had moved on to photojournalism, capturing the raw realities of global crises. Yet every so often, their paths would cross on stories that demanded their unique brand of fearless inquiry. Sarah received a package one afternoon, a box wrapped meticulously in brown paper. There was no return address. Hesitant, she carefully cut the tape and lifted the lid. Inside was a framed black and white photograph, Larchwood Manor standing ominously, as it had in that anonymous note all those years ago. Beneath the photograph was a newspaper clipping that reported the discovery of another secret chamber during the estate's demolition, hinting at deeper, darker mysteries still uncovered. The phone rang, shattering the silence, and Sarah glanced at the caller ID. "Jack, have you seen today's headlines?" he asked, his voice tinged with urgency. "About the newly discovered chamber at Larchwood," she replied, her eyes fixed on the photograph. "Exactly. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if there's more to the story? What if we just skimmed the surface?" Sarah paused, contemplating the layers of horror they had revealed and those still buried. "Some doors are better left unopened, Jack. We have to choose our battles carefully." He sighed. "You're right, but it doesn't mean I have to like it." Sarah set the photograph face down on her desk. "Me neither." She ended the call and stared out of her window at the bustling city below. They had moved on, but Larchwood Manor was a ghost that lingered in their memories, a grim reminder that the pursuit of truth is fraught with shadows. Despite everything, Sarah found herself typing out a search on her computer, her fingers hesitating over the enter key. With a sigh, she closed the tab. Some mysteries, she reasoned, are too dangerous to solve, their answers too dark to know. And so, she returned to her work, the unmarked photograph and unsolved mysteries of Larchwood Manor tucked away but never entirely forgotten. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video and turn on notifications. Write which story you liked the most in the comments.